Chapter 17. Laney was looking forward to the date, even if it would be a group date. She'd been in the main house for nearly a week, and most of the girls avoided her or gave her the cold shoulder. Not that she blamed them, but she needed to talk to someone. Sitting alone in the room while Tyler went on 2 solo dates and another group date had been torture, and she couldn't even commiserate with Marianne. Plus, the women made sure to brag about how great the date had gone when they'd returned. Laney had no idea if it was truth or not, but it was still hard to listen to. She'd spent a lot of time reading and praying, but God hadn't given her any grand revelations, and her fears that maybe this had been a mistake were still alive and well. Laney stared at the clothes in her small wardrobe. Justin had said dress casual, but that could literally mean anything, and she hadn't been privy to what Tyler's dates would be, even as his makeup artist. She decided on a pair of capri pants and her favorite Toby Mac t-shirts. At least she would be comfortable, whatever they threw at her. "Time to go," Cassidy said, sticking her head in the door. "Thanks." Cassidy had been the nicest one to her so far, although even that had just been civility. She followed Cassidy out of the house into the limo where Erica and Kanina were waiting. Marianne and Justin also stood outside the limo. Laney wanted to sit next to her friend, just for a friendly word of encouragement, but she thought that might make the women dislike her even more, so she didn't. She flashed a small smile and climbed in the limo, allowing the other women to sit closer to Tyler. "Are you ladies ready?" he asked as the door shut. He glanced to each woman, but Laney thought he stared the longest at her. She couldn't believe she hadn't seen him since the ceremony. "Where are we going?" Cassidy asked. "Something I haven't done in ages." Tyler's lips pulled into a mischievous grin. "It involves music and wheels." Music and wheels? Were they going to an arcade? Some games had steering wheels, but Laney couldn't remember if there was music. It had been ages since she'd been to an arcade. Or perhaps a go-kart track? Again wheels, but she didn't remember music. Her heart sank when they pulled up to a roller skating rink. Laney hadn't been on skates in years, and that was mainly because she had no coordination on them. She fell more often than not, or spent the time clinging to the rail. For a second, she wondered if Justin knew of her lack of coordination and had planned the whole thing. But surely that was silly. "Cool. I haven't been skating in years," Kanina said. Cassidy laughed. "I'm on a roller derby team, so this is old hat for me." Of course it was. Laney knew Tyler had connected with Cassidy, and she began to wonder if maybe Cassidy wouldn't be a better match. "I always loved skating, especially the couples skate." Erica put her hand on Tyler's thigh and smiled up at him as she spoke. Laney wanted to slap her hand away, but she tucked her hands under her lap and gritted her teeth. She could get through this date. "You okay?" Marianne asked softly as they made their way toward the door of the rink. "I don't skate," Laney whispered back quietly. Marianne's eyes widened in realization, and she offered a sympathetic nose scrunch before hurrying ahead to set up. Laney was the last one to approach the counter and ask for skates. She hated having to ask for shoes in her size. More than one person in her life had told her she had big feet for a girl, especially since she wasn't extraordinarily tall. "Size 10, please." Sure enough, the kid manning the counter looked at her, raised an eyebrow, but thankfully said nothing as he turned to the massive shelving unit that housed the roller skates. He plucked a pair and handed them across the table to her. Laney tried not to think about how many other feet had been in the skates as she took them over to the table Tyler and the other girls were at. She wasn't generally a germaphobe, and she knew they sprayed them, but still they were rental shoes and they were old. People had been putting their smelly feet in these skates for decades. Who knew if they had athlete's foot or some other foot fungus that might survive through whatever the employees sprayed in them? She took off her shoes and slid her feet in. The sole was knobby and worn and the laces were uneven. Laney was only able to lace her left skate 3/4 of the way up. She hoped it would do. Breaking an ankle would be embarrassing to say the least. "You all right there?" Tyler's voice was warm and inviting. It surprised Laney that he had stayed by her. Cassidy, Erica, and Kanina were already out in the rink, looking as if they skated every day. "I'm not very good on skates," she said as she tried to stand. One foot slipped forward while the other slipped back, and her body lunged forward. She grabbed onto Tyler's shirt to keep herself from falling, and his arm stole around her in support. "I'm sorry." "Don't be," he said with a smile. "Just the fact that you are trying is amazing. Tyler, come on, let's see what you got." Cassidy curled her finger at him in a come-hither gesture as she skated backwards across the rink. Effortlessly, it seemed. "Go on," Laney said when Tyler looked back to her. I'll make it out there eventually. Just save me a skate? You got it. He flashed her a wide smile, made sure she was steady on her feet, and then zipped off toward Cassidy. How could she be the only one with zero coordination on skates? Laney tried to push off, but she could feel her balance tilting again. She grabbed the table until she centered herself, then decided to step instead of skate her way to the rink. It was slow going, but she finally made it there. She grasped the rail as if it were a lifeline and pulled herself along it. The cold metal felt clammy against her hand. Or was that her hand that was clammy? Guess we'll see who Taylor favors now, huh? Erica asked as she skated by Laney. Laney shook her head and continued inching around the rink. Okay, all you couples, grab hands and let's do our first couple skate, a voice said over the loudspeaker. The lights went dark and spots began circulating around the floor. Great. Now she had to try to skate in the dark. As she turned to see who Tyler was choosing for the first skate, her hand hit something slimy on the rail. She jerked her hand back, sending her balance off. Laney saw her skate fly up in the air and had just enough time to find that odd before she fell backward, and the world went dark. Tyler watched Laney fall as if in slow motion. Her hand jerked up with such force that her body arched backward. Her right leg lifted in the air, followed by the left, and her arms flailed, but not in a way to break her fall. The first thing to hit the floor was her butt, followed by her head hitting the rail. That was bad, but when her head bounced off the rail and hit the hard rink floor, he knew she was unconscious. Whether she had blacked out from fear or from the concussion he was sure she had, he wasn't positive, but neither was good. Go find a phone and call 911, he said to Erica, whose eyes had widened to the size of quarters. She nodded and skated off, and he turned back to Laney. Tyler was glad to see Cassidy already by her side. As a firefighter, she probably had some paramedic training. Is she okay? Cassidy looked up at him. I don't know for sure. She hit her head pretty hard. Have you called an ambulance? I sent Erica. He placed a hand on Laney's forehead, surprised at the emotions racing through him. Had he really only known her a few weeks? Her eyes fluttered open and she jerked as if trying to sit up. Don't move, he said, even as Cassidy pushed gently on her shoulders. You hit your head, and we need to have you checked out. It seems I do that a lot around you, she said softly before her eyes closed again. Tyler bit back his grin. Smiling seemed inappropriate right now, but she was right. In the short time he had known her, she had fallen into his arms, into his chin, and now this. On most women, this would be annoying, maybe even cause for alarm, but he found it endearing on Laney. The paramedics arrived a few minutes later and forced Tyler to stand back and watch as they loaded her up on a stretcher. Watching her get taped down stirred his heart in a way he hadn't felt in a long time. I'm going with her, he said to the paramedics. They nodded and began walking toward the exit. Tyler turned to the other women and Mary Ann. Can you make sure they get back all right? Mary Ann nodded. Fear flooded her eyes, but he could tell she was trying to be brave. Make sure they take good care of her. Tyler flashed a tight smile before jogging to catch up with the paramedics. As he climbed up in the ambulance, he took a hold of Laney's hand. Please, Lord, let her be okay. Minutes later, they were entering the hospital. 28-year-old woman fell and hit her head at the roller rink, woke briefly before we arrived. Vital signs are good. The doctor looked around, catching eyes with Tyler. Do you know her name? Laney Swann. She's... He stopped, unsure how to finish that sentence. She wasn't really his girlfriend, though she probably would be outside this crazy scenario. Laney Swann. The doctor looked back down at Laney as the paramedics transferred her to a bed, and then back to Tyler. Do you know if she's from Texas? She is. Tyler wasn't sure how much information he should give out. But this doctor was acting as if he knew her, and he didn't think confirming the question was crossing any lines. Why? The doctor smiled. We went to high school together. I'll take good care of her, but I need you to wait outside. He pointed to the waiting room. Tyler wanted to object, but the doctor had already closed the curtain. As he walked over to the chairs, Tyler wondered how close they had been in high school. He hadn't had the chance to ask her much about her past, and though he knew it was probably an unfounded fear, he worried there might be something between them. A doctor was more successful than a rancher by most people's standards, and women seemed to leave him for more successful men most of the time. Tyler just hoped Laney was different. Laney opened her eyes, surprised to see white. Where was she? Oh, right, she'd fallen at the rink. Probably made a huge fool of herself, as she did it too. That explained the ache in her head. But why did her butt hurt so badly? Hey, welcome back. Laney looked to the left where a handsome man in a white coat was monitoring something on a computer screen. He looked familiar, but Laney couldn't quite place him, probably because of the pain in her head. "How are you feeling?" "Like I've been hit by a truck?" "More like a metal railing and a concrete floor." He smiled as he turned to face her, and Laney's breath caught. "Dallas?" His grin widened. "I wonder if you would remember me. What are the odds, huh?" Would she remember him? That was a stupid question. She'd spent 4 years of high school pining after him, and he'd been part of the reason she had gone into makeup art. "Pretty crazy, I'd say. I can't believe you're a doctor." "Yeah, I thought I wanted to be an engineer, but then I ended up taking an anatomy course in college for some credit I needed and found that I loved it. I'm still in my residency, but I can't see myself doing anything else now." Laney would have nodded if her head hadn't hurt so bad, as she seemed incapable of any words at the moment. Dallas Nixon was here. He was her doctor, and he was just as handsome as she remembered. But she didn't feel the spark she remembered in high school. There were no fireworks, no rapid heartbeat. Was that because it had been so long since she had seen him, or because of Tyler? "What are you doing in California? And what were you doing at a roller rink?" "I doubt you would believe me," Laney said. The whole thing seemed ridiculous to her, and she had been there. "I was asked to do makeup for a reality TV show, and now I'm a contestant." "On the show?" Dallas's eyebrow rose an inch, and his voice held a note of incredulity. "Yeah, I know, I'm not really the contestant type." "So the guy who came in with you—" His voice trailed off as if he was trying to make the connection, and then realization sparked in his eyes. "It's a dating show." Laney hated the way he said it, like she was desperate for a date. Of course, that's what she had thought about the contestants initially, too, so she couldn't really blame him. "It is, but it's not like you think." He took her hand and squeezed it. "Well, whatever it is, I'm glad I was the doctor on duty when you came in. It was good to see you again." The door opened then, and Tyler stepped in. Though Dallas let go of her hand almost immediately, she saw Tyler's jaw tense. He had seen it, and he didn't look happy about it. "How's she doing, doctor?" Dallas glanced at Tyler before turning his attention to Laney, but now she almost wished he wouldn't. The tension in the room was palpable. "She is fine. You had a mild concussion, and you bruised your tailbone, so you'll need to take it easy for the next few weeks, but you'll recover fully. You'll probably also need a donut pillow to sit with for a while, so I'll have the nurse bring that in. I'd like to keep you overnight for observation, but you should be fine to go tomorrow. I have to check on some other patients, but I'll be back to look in on you later. Push the call button if you need anything." He gave her one final smile before exiting the room. Tyler crossed to her bed and took her hand. "I'm glad to hear you're going to be okay. It worried me when I saw you fall." "I'm sorry I worried you. I should have warned you about my klutzy tendency. If this changes how you feel, I understand." "Laney, it changes nothing in how I feel. I don't care if you can't skate, but I do have to ask. Is there anything between you and the doctor?" Laney shook her head. "Dallas was my crush in high school, but he never gave me the time of day. He was just being friendly." Tyler's eyes searched hers as if deciding if he could trust her, but finally he nodded. "I'm glad to hear it, because I have to tell you that my heart froze when I saw you fall. I don't know why I feel so close to you in this short time, but I do." "I do too, and I agree it's crazy, but it might just be a God thing." His lips pulled into a smile. "Maybe it is. God gave me peace about coming on the show, and I know things always work out better when I let him be in control, but it isn't always easy." "No, it isn't." Laney thought back to all her failed relationships and her job with Madame Bonovich. She hadn't been letting God control her life. She'd been trying to control her life. No wonder it hadn't worked out the way she'd planned. But as she looked at Tyler, she realized God's way was a lot better. Laney wanted him to kiss her, but she didn't want their first kiss to be in a hospital room, and it appeared he didn't either as he sucked in a breath and then released it. "I have to get back to the house, but I'll be here when you get released." "I'll be here," she said with a smile, but she hated that he was going back to the house. She hated knowing there was another ceremony and 3 other women who would visit his ranch. She couldn't wait for this show to be over.